GraphQL is a new and significantly improved way of communicating between computers. So for example, if you've got a web app or a mobile app that needs some data from a server, you could use GraphQL to request the exact data you need from the server. But odds are, many of you are asking the question, why should I or would I want to use GraphQL? I mean, what does GraphQL offer over the more widely used options? This is the question we'll start to look at in this video. The way most applications communicate with servers today is using RESTful web services, which is a style of communication that was created around 20 years ago. Now, if you're not sure what I mean by REST, just hang with me, and I'll provide a brief description of what REST is in just a moment. But just think about this for a second. RESTful web services have been around for about 2 decades. There's not a lot of internet technologies that have lasted and flourished for 20 years. So here's a question for you. How much have we changed the way we build web applications since the year 2000? Well, it used to be that the word application meant native apps that typically ran on your desktop. But then the web became more popular. Initially, the web was just static HTML, but that quickly transitioned to dynamically generated content. Then we added Ajax, which was quickly followed by jQuery, a killer technology that people loved until they didn't. Then at some point, people started creating single-page apps using a whole bunch of new technologies. And of course, real smartphones became a thing, which led to mobile apps, and of course, the web just continued to grow and grow and grow. So to answer the question I posed a moment ago, which was how much have we changed the way we build apps? Well, I'd say we've completely changed how we make applications a few times over, yet we're still mostly using REST for communication. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with REST, let me provide a very brief description of what REST is. REST, which stands for Representational State Transfer, is a way for computers to communicate that revolves around the idea of resources. I'll give you an example. Imagine we're working on a to-do list app like this, and we need to get a list of to-do items from the server to display in the app. The way this could be solved with REST is you might have an HTTP endpoint for the to-dos that looks something like this. The key part of this URL is that it's pointing to a specific resource type, a to-dos resource. Now, if you needed to fetch a list of to-do items, you'd perform a specific type of HTTP request called a GET request to this to-dos resource endpoint. Then the server would respond with the to-do items, which would get used in the app as needed. If we needed to add a to-do item, we'd just perform a different kind of HTTP request, a POST request, to this same to-dos resource endpoint, sending along the new to-do item information. If we needed to update a to-do item, we'd typically perform an HTTP PUT request to this to-do resource endpoint, except we'd tweak the endpoint, adding the unique to-do item ID that we're wanting updated onto the end of the URL, and of course we'd pass along any data that we wanted updated for this particular to-do item. If we needed to delete a to-do item, we'd typically perform an HTTP delete request to this detailed to-do resource endpoint. Okay, here's the important thing to know about REST. It's all about resources, like a to-do resource, and each resource will have an endpoint. Now, this resource-focused way of communicating between computers is relatively simple to understand, and it's a way nicer option than some of the alternatives that were popular in the early 2000s. And as you probably know, REST has been widely adopted and used since it was formalized around the year 2000. But I want to circle back to the question I posed a few moments ago, which was the question, how much have we changed the way we build apps since the year 2000 when REST was created? I'd say we've significantly changed how apps are built. Probably the biggest change we've had for web applications is the migration from primarily multi-page server-rendered apps to single-page apps rendered in the browser, and of course the explosion of mobile apps and mobile usage. And apps in general have become much more sophisticated, and they do a whole lot more today than they've ever done before. So here's a question I'll pose to you. Is using REST the best option for communication between your apps and your servers, especially considering how much apps have changed since REST was created around 20 years ago? I suspect most developers aren't asking this question yet, possibly because they're just so familiar with REST and it's worked reasonably well up until recently. But things have really changed with how apps are created and how they function, and REST has some serious shortcomings when you consider the needs of modern-day applications. Okay, so what are these problems you get with REST and other similar options? That's the question we'll look at in the next video.